Hello, everybody. Today we're going to continue with our lesson on the 1920s. Up until this part, you should have remembered that the 1920s is a time period of significant growth of the United States. We're going to see really America coming into its own. You learned in the last lesson this is the time period of a huge increase in Model T sales for a time period when we're going to have lots of heroes of the 1920s, whether it's Charles Lindbergh, whether it is Babe Ruth, etc. It's a time period of the radio. It's really an exciting time in the 1920s. However, it is a time when we are going to see a really big clash of the traditional American values of what I think of as traditional American values with a clash of more modern views of the world and more modern culture. And you're going to see that as we go through our lesson for today. So let's get started. You need your spiral out. If you will take some notes over each of the concepts that we go over today. I'm really going to buzz over these pretty quickly, but I want you to make sure that you've got these in your notes. And if you will then please upload a picture of your notes to Canvas, again, as evidence that you've completed this lesson. Okay, let's get started. True or false? The 1920s were a prosperous time for the United States. What do you think? It is, of course, true. Not for everybody, but it is going to see a time period where we're going to see a tremendous growth for some. True or false? The 1920s was the start of racism declining in America. Of course, you should know that is false. We are going to see the height of the KKK in the Roaring '20s, and we'll talk about why here in just a little bit. True or false? Crime in the 1920s declined due to the increased prosperity. Of course, that is false. We are going to see crime actually increase with organized crime. This is the time period of Al Capone and the original gangsters, etc., as a result of Prohibition. And then finally, true or false? Many women of the 1920s were frowned upon because of their partying ways. And of course, that is true. This is the time period of the flapper. Really and truly, this is the example of the 1920s and how we'd had a very traditional America up until now. And then all of a sudden, you get women that are cutting their skirts short, they're cutting their hair, they're smoking, they're partying, and that's more of a modern view. And again, many people are not going to be super happy about that. All right, so what is America like as a result of the end of World War I? Well, we're kind of going through a little bit of an identity crisis. What does it really mean to be an American? We have immigrants coming from all over the world. We have a lot of fear of outsiders at this time period. Hopefully, you can connect this to the concept of nativism. We talked about that with the Gilded Age, but that preference for native-born Americans and a desire to limit immigration. And don't forget, a lot of this comes from the communism is spreading throughout Russia at this time period, and the fear of those people coming, or communism coming into the United States. It really is a time period of where we're going to start to see nativism rise. And a lot of that is going to be dealing with anti-immigration, et cetera, as we move forward. It is a time period of racial unrest. The Great Migration is going to lead to several race riots that are going to happen in the United States. Don't forget, the Great Migration is that time period when African Americans leave the racist Jim Crow South to go north for jobs. Remember, in World War I, when you have soldiers that leave their jobs, there's going to leave some openings, and many African Americans will see that as a time period to move north. But of course, I want to remind you that it is going to cause some racial unrest. And again, racism is going to increase because of many of the problems that are going to arise from people feeling that if you live up north and you feel that the jobs are being taken by others, it's going to cause a rise in racism as we go forward. All right, weird topic. And I am going to link a video in Canvas for you on eugenics. But it is a time period because of this kind of the festering idea in the 1920s of nativism, where we're going to see a rise of people that believe that in the concept of what's called eugenics. And eugenics was a weird false science of the idea that they wanted to create what we think of, or what they thought of as a perfect, pure human. It's going to seem weird, but the idea that we could breed the perfect human, and if anyone had any kind of inherited traits, whether it was a birth defect, anything like that, that you could breed those out, and that we only wanted people to breed that could have that could produce the perfect breed at this point. This added to that idea of anti-immigrant feelings, et cetera, et cetera. And it is going to be a weird thing in the 1920s. So I wanted you all to see a couple of pictures of this. You'll see that it's a eugenic health exhibit. You'll see that, if you couldn't read or write, they didn't want you to breed. I always throw this up here when we talk about this in class is if any of these things would have applied to you in the 1920s, then you would have been seen as someone that was unfit to breed. So the eugenics was a very strange time period. And again, I encourage you to look in Canvas and to watch the short video that I'm going to put in there. But it's a weird time period, and it is going to lead to a number of forced sterilizations. So if you look at that down at the bottom, 60,000 Americans were sterilized against their will. And again, a lot of this was the legal basis for these forced sterilizations was called eugenics. And I always laugh at this. This was a certificate. This guarantees. So if you went on, let's just pretend you went on your first date and you go on your first date and you go, hey, honey, I got my eugenics certificate, and it might look something like this. This guarantees that I've examined the center of this card to find a perfect physical and mental balance and unusually strong eugenic love possibilities well fitted to promote the happiness and welfare of the race. Is that ridiculous or what? But anyway, that's what it was in the 1920s. So check out that video that you'll see in Canvas to help you understand the concept of eugenics. A couple of other pictures, and we'll move on. All right, if you've never seen this image, if you look carefully in the background, you will see our nation's capital. In the 1920s, we have a huge upsurge of the KKK. In this creepy picture right here of a Ferris wheel with the KKK. Ugh, it's awful. Anyway, so in the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan is going to lead the movement to restrict immigration. So we all know that the KKK had been against African Americans for a very long time. And now they're going to kind of switch their, refocus their attention on Catholics, Jews, immigrants, anybody that they believe to have un-American values. And because of this campaign, they will have somewhere around 4 million members in the 1920s. So you've got to connect the fact that the Ku Klux Klan will not just be against African Americans, which is what we tend to think after the Civil War, but now they are going against immigrants and anybody that they feel would have had un-American values at this time. Another way that America is going to kind of show its nativist tendencies is through a series of acts in the 1920s. The big one is called the National Origins Act. Make sure you have this one down, please. And the National Origins Act is a way for the government to limit the amount of immigrants that are coming into the United States. And the way that he essentially did it is they took the total number of people living within whatever ethnic group already living in the United States. And then they said, we are only going to restrict immigration from that immigrant group to a certain quota. In other words, once you reach your quota, then you are not allowed to have any more immigrants from that particular group come in. It is a way to be able to restrict immigration through quotas in the 1920s. So you're going to cap the amount of immigrants that can come in from that immigrant group. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so just to kind of summarize this part up in terms of racism and nativism, people begin to link radical ideas to communists and immigrants. We have a rise of nativism in the United States, increase in the KKK, and of course that will lead to quotas and limitations on immigration that are going to be put into the United States, and most of those are coming from Southern and Eastern European countries. Okay, let's move on. Topic we got to talk about next is called the Palmer Raid. So make sure that is in your notes. It is associated with the Red Scare. So let's review. We talked about this at the end of World War I, but don't forget that in the middle of World War I is when Russia will turn communist. And of course, the fear comes in that we will end up having immigrants coming in from Russia that could spread communism to the United States. And that is called the Red Scare. And of course, that will lead to Congress passing those laws to limit immigration with quotas and such that we just looked at. Well, something that happens around this time period in 1919 is that suddenly 8 bombs will go off simultaneously in 8 different cities around the United States. And it suggested a nationwide conspiracy. Everybody kind of freaks out. One of those bombs damages the home of A. Mitchell Palmer, who was the U.S. Attorney General, and he lived in Washington, D.C. And people thought the bombs were planted by the communists. And so what does it do? It leads to a fear of communism spreading throughout the United States once again. So what happens as the result of this? Well, we get what's called the Palmer raids, and the U.S. government started to arrest massive amounts of people that were suspected of being communist on very, very, very little evidence in 1919. This is when we will start to see the FBI kind of come into its existence at this point. It will be headed by a gentleman by the name of J. Edgar Hoover. You've probably heard of him before. Not to be confused with the Hoover that's the president. This is J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover will end up being the director of the FBI for a very, very, very long time. But although the evidence didn't really implicate anyone, these Palmer agents will deport somewhere around 500 immigrants that they consider to be radicals. And they didn't use any search warrants. They basically denied all sorts of rights that are guaranteed within the Bill of Rights. But at the end of the day, this was a reaction, of course, to what? It is a reaction to communist influence in the United States. So you've got to be able to connect the Palmer raids to the Red Scare, which is, of course, going back to a fear of immigration coming through. And hopefully you can connect that the Palmer raids now are connected back to immigrants. Okay, we're moving forward. One of the other trends that we see in the 1920s is a really huge spread in fundamentalism. And it is a time period when conservative Christians are really struggling to maintain their beliefs. And so they essentially are going to start to promote the fact and really move forward with the ideas of fundamentalism. And so I want to make sure that we all know, let's get a definition of fundamentalism down. It is a movement based on the literal interpretation of the Bible. Fundamentalists were very skeptical of any kind of science, any kind of scientific discoveries. They rejected the theory of evolution, and they believed that anything that was important could be found in the Bible and that we should interpret the Bible literally. Literally. That's very, very important. So when we talk about fundamentalism, this is about to be the clash between the Bible and science, okay? All right, I start off this quick, and we're almost finished for today, by the way. I start off this story with this picture. Look very carefully. It says the Anti-Evolution League, the conflict, hell in the high school. And you will see the word Brian there again, and we will get to that in just a second. So let's remember that we have the concept of creationism in the Bible, that of course God created man, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have the concept of evolution, which is of course that you can connect that man, came from monkeys, et cetera. So you all have remembered and looked at all of that in your science classes. We're not going to spend much time on that. But we do have to know the importance of something called the Scopes trial, or otherwise nicknamed the Scopes monkey trial. Okay, so let's get into this. So in 1925, Tennessee passed something called the Butler Act. What made it illegal to teach anything that denied creationism, denied the Bible, and taught evolution instead. John T. Scopes was a substitute teacher. He was going to go into a biology class, and he volunteered to test the Butler Act by teaching evolution in his class. We call this the Scopes trial because it's John T. Scopes that of course was the gentleman that is going to be arrested. And at the end of the day, he will teach a lesson on evolution, and he will be arrested. He will be put on trial. And he will be found guilty of teaching evolution. Later on, this will be overturned, and it is the quintessential idea of the clash between should we believe the Bible or should we believe science? You are going to need to go into Canvas, and you are going to have an assignment on the Scopes trial that you're going to need to complete, and it's going to give you more information about this, but it is essentially that clash of traditional values of creationism versus evolution in terms of science. Okay, if you will, you may stop the video now. If you will take a picture of your notes and upload those into Canvas, we are finished with this lesson, and we will see you soon.